6 months ago, the unthinkable. In the early morning hours of July 4th, the Guadalupe River rose right here where I'm standing, and the water just kept pouring in.
Kerr County 911, what's the location of your emergency?
There are a bunch of campers that need evacuation. It could be hundreds of girls.
Lives lost.
I've lost near friends, best friends.
Homes and businesses devastated.
Everything I have is gone.
All on a holiday weekend with hundreds gathered here to celebrate Independence Day. But in the midst of all this heartbreak, there is hope. We've seen it firsthand by watching Texas communities rise.
Makes you want to be more of the community, help the community out, help your neighbors.
This next half hour, we'll honor the helpers and get to the heart of why these floods became so devastating. Plus, you'll hear from Texans still putting their lives back together as we show you Texas rising 6 months after the floods.
I'm here on Water Street in downtown Kerrville, where a wall of hope stood, acting as a place for people to come and grieve in the weeks following the floods. Many people leaving letters, photos, flowers, and teddy bears. Mementos now immortalized at the Hill Country Arts Foundation. People also built crosses along the bank of the Guadalupe. And at a sculpture garden a few miles up the road, families who lost someone were gifted crosses, and a more permanent memorial is now in place. Across the state, green ribbons tied to trees and fences to show solidarity with the Hill Country as the whole state mourned together.
I could imagine that almost everybody that lives here knows somebody that was lost in this flood.
Not numbers, they're little girls and men and mothers and fathers, and what is this, a big square box full of stuff, that I can easily rebuild.
Then there were these 27 trunks, each laid on the front lawn of the White House to honor a young life lost at Camp Mystic. That loss weighed overwhelmingly on these communities. The connections to Camp Mystic stretch across the state of Texas. You may know a former camper, or you yourself may have attended this Christian sleepaway camp years ago. For nearly a century, many young girls came as strangers, but ended up leaving with a lifelong sisterhood. But last summer, many young girls never got that chance. I'm joined now by Brian Bowes, who has been covering this story since it happened. Brian, how is the community coping 6 months after such devastation?
Alex, it's been such a journey, such a long trip for everyone involved. And that's really speaking to the people here at Camp Mystic, the owners, the people that come here every year, and the families that lost someone, plus the families that didn't lose someone. It's something that they're looking to move on from, but also remember.
The search for the missing started months ago. The rescue crews, just one of the many reminders of what happened here, what happened to families like Hadley Hannah's.
She may have her dad's personality, but she was my mini-me and my best friend. I promised her she would be safe and okay. I told her camp was the safest place she could be.
They traveled to Austin, asking lawmakers for change. Their pleas were heard. The Heavens 27 Camp Safety Act was quickly enacted in August. But Camp Mystic's announcement that they'd reopen their Cypress Lake location this summer brought on numerous lawsuits from many of those same families, including the Pecks.
This is the only way we're going to get answers from these folks, is to see them in court.
The owners of Camp Mystic have remained steadfast, calling the flood an unavoidable tragedy, and quickly joining other camps in the area by installing state-of-the-art warning systems. It can be a divisive issue for both those who attended the camps and those who live here. But one thing is certain.
When someone you love becomes a memory, that memory becomes a treasure.
A treasure, like the one 8-year-old Virginia Hollis left for her parents.
Her last song she ever composed, Virginia's song.
You know, I really don't think it can be overstated how important not just Camp Mystic, but all these camps are to the people that have attended them. The people here in the Hill Country and beyond, generations of women, of girls that have enjoyed their time and look so fondly on their time along the Guadalupe River. And there's just so many questions of what's going to happen. Will these camps actually open back up? Who will attend the camps? And once we get to a courtroom, what will happen there? Alex, a long journey still ahead.
Still pending litigation and making sure that a heartbreak like this and tragedy like this doesn't happen again. Brian, thank you. Nearly 20,000 volunteers made their way here to the Hill Country after the floods. That comes out to about a third of Kerr County's entire population. Many of these volunteers hoped to bring closure to families. After the flood, the number of people missing was in the hundreds. And now, 6 months later, 2 have still not been found. One young camper and a father visiting from North Texas. Volunteers are still searching to this day. From day one, we were here to witness those volunteers help out in the Hill Country. That includes our Lauren Kendrick, who was with the search and rescue teams daily on their efforts. Lauren, talk to me about what you remember from those first moments.
That's right. You know, I arrived on July 5th, and at that moment, it was clear that even first responders didn't have a clear idea of just how many people were swept away in the flood. And as the water subsided, it was clear that those that were still missing would not be found alive. It was then that we saw teams from across the country descend on the Texas Hill Country as the rescue effort became a recovery mission. You may remember the teams of those crews quickly filled the streets here in the Hill Country and even hotels and parking lots in Central and South Texas, anywhere in the vicinity where they could find space just to be close and continue the search. Eventually, the remains of 117 people were found, and even now, 6 months later, the effort is still visible. A barge was brought into Ingram Lake, where the Guadalupe River is held back by a dam there, and teams use that barge to search specific areas, especially where the lake filled with debris. And even today, the work continues.
And certainly we will always be thankful for the support that we've seen in this area. Lauren, thank you. The big question, could something as devastating as this happen again? Some science behind the Hill Country says yes. After the break, we'll explain why this area is known as Flash Flood Alley. To look forward, sometimes you need to look back. The 2025 floods that happened here along the Guadalupe riverbank share a deadly similarity with a flood that happened back in July of 1978. Here's the Guadalupe then, after a tropical storm caused the river to swell, killing 33 people. And here's the river 6 months ago, after remnants of Tropical Storm Barry stalled out over central Texas. Satellite images show the extent of the water's power following the flood, leaving behind dirt, debris, and chaos. So what led to this? To better understand that, let's take a look at just how fast the water rose. At around midnight, the National Weather Service reported flash flooding and significant impacts were possible. Rain was falling, but it wasn't dangerous just yet. By 1:14 a.m., the National Weather Service issued a flash flood warning. A PDS was issued. That's what's known as a particularly dangerous situation. That happened at 4:03 a.m. That's a rare warning and a life-threatening one. The river was surging and 911 calls were coming in.
Water's coming up really high.
We have almost water in our house.
I need you to get to higher ground.
For perspective, right now you're seeing me at about ground level, but we're gonna raise the camera up to 37 feet, which is the height that the floodwaters reached in Hunt at around 5 a.m. To escape, people clung to trees, debris, and hope, but for many, there was no surviving that amount of water. Let's bring in our chief meteorologist, Ricky Cody from the Weather Center. Ricky, talk to us about the morning of July 4th. There was more to it than just the slow-moving thunderstorms, correct?
You know, Alex, Tropical Storm Barry made landfall in Mexico on June 29th and gradually moved northward and parked itself nearly stationary over the Texas Hill Country for 3 days. With it, significant rainfall fell, and on top of that, we had river flooding. Part of the Guadalupe River at Hunt rose more than 2 feet in less than 5 minutes.
We talked about the slow-moving thunderstorms that played a big role in that flooding, but there's more to it than that, right, Ricky?
Alex, certainly the impacts from Tropical Storm Barry, as well as the additional moisture in the Hill Country, played a major role in what unfolded this summer. But also, it is the Hill Country's geography and topography that also played a role. So let's talk about why. Much of the Texas Hill Country sits on thin, rocky soil, layered over vast beds of limestone. Here's the issue. You've got that ground that's only a few inches to maybe a foot deep in many spots, and then it hits that near solid rock. Doesn't allow for the water to absorb. So even during average rain events, this is problematic. But when you have intense rain events coupled with this area's steep terrain, that can be problematic. Take a look at all the flash flood warnings that were issued by the National Weather Service office during the month of July. It's clear to see this area of Texas, and furthermore, this area of the country is one of the most flood-prone areas of the 48 continental United States. Here's a look that morning, July 4th. The river got so bad at the Guadalupe River, I should say, at Hunt, that not only did we hit major flood status, but the gauge broke. We don't know what the data looks like beyond that. That vulnerability was also amplified by persistent drought. We had months of little to no rain and sunshine baking us. This makes the ground act more like pavement, further making it difficult for the ground to absorb water. So you add the limestone soil, the ongoing drought, little vegetation, and steep basins, it makes sense why this flooding was one of the worst in Texas history. Alex.
Ricky, thank you. To rebuild here will take a lot of time and even more money. Millions of dollars in federal support was offered to Central Texans impacted by the floods, but not everyone was approved. I'm joined now by Amber Hughes, who has spent a lot of time right here in Ingram. And Amber, you've spent a lot of time speaking with many families and businesses that were impacted by the flooding. Tell me what stands out to you among your reporting.
Yeah, the most memorable for me is probably the Hudson family. They're a couple that lives not too far from here in Ingram. And the 4th of July was their 31st wedding anniversary, and they actually spent that out on their porch. They actually sent this video to us of how that morning went as water started to come into their home.
When I woke up, floodwaters were about here, and in about, 4 or 5 minutes, we had water up to here.
Their home was built 80 years ago, and it had never flooded. Months later, there's still evidence of the 4 feet of water that got into their home.
And the recovery now has been so intense for so many people, and for the Hudsons too. Is this something that all of it is coming out of pocket for them? How are they navigating this?
Yeah, being home and business, a lot of it is coming out of pocket, but they were one of the families that were fortunate enough to get FEMA assistance. I believe it's about 3% of the homes out here that were damaged in Kerr County. Those people didn't have flood insurance, just like the Hudsons, because they don't live in a floodplain, so they never needed the flood insurance. So although they had, I believe, 3,200 folks that applied for FEMA assistance, only about 700 people have been approved so far to get that federal aid. So they're counting on nonprofits and other agencies to kind of fill in the gaps. And then, of course, you have those out-of-pocket expenses to try to rebuild your home, rebuild your business.
Amber, thank you so much for sharing Jack and Jennifer's story with us. Really inspiring to see their love prevail through something like this. And after the floods, 26 states from across the country provided assistance, including National Guard troops from Arkansas, Arizona, and North Dakota. There was international support as well, with search and rescue teams flying in from the Czech Republic, Germany, and Mexico. Donations and supplies poured in from Texas organizations like HEB, P. Terry's, Kendra Scott, and James Avery, just to name a few. Several pro sports teams also giving more than $6.3 million, among them the Dallas Cowboys, the San Antonio Spurs, and the Houston Astros. In all, the Community Foundation for the Texas Hill Country reports raising more than $100 million for the Kerr County Relief Fund. And as the water receded, a wave of questions came in as to what went wrong. From missed alerts to a lack of warning systems. After the break, we'll look back into the promises made to protect Texas from future floods.
Texas is in this with the people in the Hill Country right here. We are not leaving until this job is finished.
In the days following the flood came a lot of information. Both state and local leaders updated Texans on the recovery and cleanup efforts. In fact, Governor Greg Abbott held several press conferences right here where I'm standing in front of the Hunt store. Many officials vowed they would never let anything like this happen again. And that played out in the state legislature, where a special committee formed that heard the families of young flood victims and experts. During those hearings, Kerr County's emergency response was put under the microscope.
I don't know where you were on day one on July 4th, but you should have been here.
By the end of the session, the governor signed 3 new laws. The first put $50 million toward installing outdoor warning systems in flood-affected counties like Kerr County. The other 2 focusing on safety at youth campsites. One, nicknamed the Heavens 27 law, prohibits youth camps from being licensed if they have cabins in FEMA-designated floodplains. The other requires youth camps to develop detailed emergency plans for several emergency scenarios like floods. In the wake of the floodwaters, Texas's perseverance also rushed in. This was a home our news crew visited just days after the flood. It trapped Jim Tolliver and his wife up in their attic. This is a look at it today, 6 months later, with much progress being made. Our Abigail Verwick has more on how they're doing today.
The windows and walls in this room were gone after the flood. Cabinets and appliances that were left in the home were damaged beyond repair. 6 months later, things look different here. But for residents, they say they can remember the storm that changed their lives like it was yesterday.
I asked my wife, I said, do you want to rebuild or what do you want to do? And she said, I don't know. And I said, well, I do know no matter what we do, whether we walk away or whether we rebuild, I have to clean the house out and I have to strip it down to its studs.
That's exactly what he did. After sheltering from the flood in his attic, one of the lucky ones, not only to survive,
no more than 5 to 10 seconds. Later, we would have been bouncing around the house.
But their structure still intact. Jim Tolliver and his wife decided to rebuild.
It has been a hard process and a hard grind. You have to have indomitable will and a lot of spirit.
Whether it's collecting the debris FEMA doesn't pick up.
So their rules are if it's less than 2 inches in diameter and less than 4 feet long, they don't pick it up. So we've been raking the property.
Working with contractors already stretched thin.
750 structures across the county that have taken some level of damage. That's a lot. And in a small community like us where there's only so many of us builders and construction guys out here.
Or even salvaging pieces they were able to save.
It's got a few dings and scratches on it. But
Jim and his wife aren't giving up on their dream.
The plan is to rebuild and live here the rest of our life.
You can still see it, evidence of the damage left behind, from the battered trees that still stand to the green ribbons that flow in the breeze. But there's more here that can't be seen, and that's Texas resilience. You'll find renewed purpose as well as strength and faith. For some, it's to find a lost connection or recover a cherished item.
However much time it takes, that's how much time it takes.
While others channel their grief through art. Second chances rise from loss.
Either one of us had stumbled and fell down, we would have just been gone.
A new take on life and love.
In sickness and in health, you may kiss your bride.
If you go, I go. We go together. Second chance life gave us.
All signs of Texas rising, rebuilding one day at a time.
Things that you learn along the way are preparing you for something bigger.
It just feels like home.
There is hope beyond the devastation 6 months after the floods.